Hey guys, Eric Swanson, the Habitude Warrior Coach. Habitudes is all about your habits and your attitude. So in this next episode, I really want you to focus in on what your habits are every single day and your attitudes as well. And can you change those slightly? So I really hope you'll enjoy this next episode of one of our speakers, our trainers, our leaders from the Habitudes Conference. So looking forward to seeing you inside and checking out the next episode.
See, a few years ago, I had this opportunity to go to this awesome investor conference. And the conference was on the big island of Hawaii. And I remembered that when I first got there on the first day and I was checking in, here's what happened. They gave me a t-shirt and it was a certain color. And here's what they said. They said, we want you to find every single person who's here that has the same color t-shirt because you guys are going to make up a team. And you're going to spend the entire day going around the big island of Hawaii on this obstacle course, like this crazy competition. Sounds cool, right? So I start to look around for the people on my team. And I see the first person. It's Dick Costolo, the CEO of Twitter. And I look around and I see the second person. It's Sarah Lacy. Sarah Lacy is probably the most influential person ever when it comes to everything Silicon Valley and news and media. And then I look over here, and here's Bill Tye, the famous venture capitalist. And I'm like, oh my God, with all of this brain power, there is absolutely no way that we can't win. But there was one person left, and none of us could find him. And then I turned around, and there he was, MC Hammer. You know, MC Hammer, like the rapper, what's the song he does? Can't touch this, that's right. So anyway, we all pile in this van, and we head out to our first clue. And I remember we get to the first clue, and it's like these sticks and these rocks and all this stuff in this pile, and then there's this sheet of paper. And so we read the clue, and I remember that me and Dick and Sarah, we're trying to figure this thing out, and we're like 15, 20 minutes in. Now Hammer, he's over here. Hammer's over here. He's talking on his cell phone, like having a great time, looking at the ocean, talking to his boys. So I'm like, Hammer, would you come over and help us out? And he says, no problem. So he walks over. He says, let me see that piece of paper. He takes it. He reads it one time. He says, do this, 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 and this. Takes the paper, drops the mic, and he walks away. And guess what? He was right. So we go to the second clue. And the same thing happened. It was like me and Dick and Bill said, we're looking at this thing, we can't figure it out. Hammer, would you come help us? So over here says, no problem. He takes the sheet of paper, the clue, he reads it one time, and he gets it right. So that day, we had 8 clues, and guess what? MC Hammer solved every single one. It was incredible. And I remember that night I asked him, I saw him at the hotel, I said, dude, that was amazing. I said, how did you do that? And he started to laugh. And he said this, he said, you entrepreneurs, he said, you're all the same. He said, you start here, this is where you start, and your goal is over here. And he said, somehow you figure out a way to make everything so complicated in the middle. And he said, I live my life with one very simple philosophy. He said, I always find a way to the simplest path first. And so that's what we're going to do in the short time that we have together today. I'm going to share with you a few simple ideas that I'm telling you can apply them today. You can apply them right now to get amazing results for your business. Does that sound good? Yeah. All right, awesome. So let's start with number 1. And again, Eric mentioned that I had done some stuff with Robbins and Branson, just a little bit about my background. So I have been on launch teams of really small businesses that became big brands, like CBSSports.com. You guys ever heard of that? Yeah, NBC Internet. I launched FoxSports.com for all you sports fans. And then the last company was sold to Branson. And the only reason that I bring that up is I've had a chance to learn from some of the most amazing innovators and entrepreneurs who've taught me what they do in today's market to build great businesses. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So again, here's idea number 1. This is where you start. Learn how to buy a rainforest. Number 1 is learn how to buy a rainforest. And here's what I mean. A few years ago, I was invited by Richard Branson to his home on Necker Island. And I was like so excited to be a part of this opportunity. Like I was so excited to be there. And I remember the first night when it was time for dinner, they asked all of us who were there to come down to the beach. And we were supposed to get in these little boats and head out to an island because we learned that Richard didn't only own the island that I was staying on called Necker, but he had just bought the island right next door called Mosquito. Because I guess if you're going to own one island, you might as well own the one next door, right? And so we got in these little boats, and we headed out on a course towards Mosquito. And it was so surreal. It was pitch dark at night. And there's literally nothing on this island, nothing on this little lump of land. And we go around this final corner, and there was this strip of beach. And Richard had these tiki torches set up and this amazing barbecue. It was so cool. And I remember I got out of the boat, I grabbed my plate, and I was looking for a place to eat. And I saw Richard, and he was sitting cross-legged on the beach, so I walked over and I sat down next to him. But here's the thing. He was on the phone, and he was negotiating a deal, and he was so passionate. And it seemed that everybody else that was there knew what it was he was trying to buy, except for me. So I asked him, I said, Richard, what is it that you want to buy? And he said this, the rainforest. And I'm like, the rainforest, which one? And he said, the Amazon. Because again, I guess if you're going to buy a rainforest, you should probably buy the biggest one, right? And then I remember saying in that moment, like, has anything ever just like instinctively come out of your mouth and you're just like, I can't believe I said that, or I can't believe I did that? I said what I guess I thought everyone else was thinking, which was, that's impossible. Okay, here's rule number one, never tell somebody like a Tony Robbins or Richard Branson that anything is impossible. And Richard looked at me with this fire in his eye, and I remember, I'll never forget, he said to me, he said, you want to learn how to buy a rainforest? I'm going to teach you how to do it. And here's where he started. You got to start with your why. Why is it that you're doing this thing? And for Richard, the answer was simple. Richard wanted to stop deforestation in the rainforest, and he wanted to protect the indigenous animals. And by the way, in your business, if you have a strong enough why, you will always figure out a way how to do it. So he knew his why. So then he asked us this. He said, if that's our why, do we really have to own the rainforest, or could we lease it? Now, for me, that was a huge shift in thinking. And he said, and if we could lease it, he said, let's say we could get a willing seller in the room with me. He said, I'm a pretty good negotiator. Do you think I could negotiate the right deal? And I said, I bet on you. And so then he asked the important question that everyone, how are we going to finance it? How are we going to finance it? And I remember that the people in our group were throwing out names of billionaires. These are people that Richard, like they were in his circle, that he thought, give a bunch of money towards this cause. And Richard put his hands up and he said, no. He said, what if it didn't matter? What if it didn't matter if you gave a dime or a dollar, effectively crowdsourcing buying the rainforest? And I remember this. In 5 minutes, buying the rainforest seemed easier than eating my bowl of soup. And what I learned in that moment was this. What I learned is, if you have the right mindset, you have the right people, and you put the right resources around you, you can achieve virtually anything that you dream. Which brings me to number 2. You want to buy the rainforest, so where do you start? You start here, by focusing on one hammer and one nail. One hammer and one nail. And here's what I mean. Let's say I gave you one hammer and one nail, and your job's simple. All you have to do is take that hammer and take that nail and drive that nail into a piece of wood. Really nail that business. Now, the odds are you may miss the first time, you may miss the second time, but eventually I'm going to bet that you're going to nail it. Let's say I give you 2 hammers and 2 nails. You got a problem. Who's going to hold the nails? Now, let's say you find somebody crazy enough to do it. You have to take a hammer in each hand, and you have to come back, and you have to strike at the same time. And the odds are you're going to miss the first, the second. You're going to miss the third. In fact, you may never get it right. Let's say I give you 10 hammers and 10 nails. You get the point. The biggest problem that entrepreneurs have when launching new businesses, products, or services is this. They focus on doing too many things at once. And so what I say is focus on one hammer and one nail. Don't try and do everything, try and do one thing. And it should never be the hardest thing, it should be the simplest. What I call the minimum viable product. The most basic version of what it is that you want to release. Launch that once, get it out there as fast as you can, get feedback from others, iterate your product, and relaunch. Does that make sense? And always determine what it is that you're going to build or you're going to launch next based on what your paying customers are telling you. Does that make sense? Awesome. Point number 3. Step number 3. Go have an awesome cup of coffee. An awesome cup of coffee. And here's what I mean. So a couple years ago, I had a chance to work on an event with Howard Schultz. Right? You guys know Howard Schultz from Starbucks? And I am the biggest fan of Howard Schultz. And I think I'm probably in Starbucks like 2 or 3 times a day. It's like my secret, I just do it, right? And I was so excited to meet him and to learn how he built what he built. And I remember that he had an hour to speak to a room of about 400 entrepreneurs. And at the end of the hour, I felt so disappointed. And the reason was, what he was talking about seemed like this corporate speech, like this, almost like a press release. And that's not what I came to hear. Now, when he was finished, it was time for Q&A, and the last person in Q&A is a really good friend of mine. And he stood up and he said, Mr. Schultz, he said, I love you, I respect you, I'm in your store every day. He said, but there's one thing I learned tonight. One thing. He said, and it's this. I learned I am nothing like you. He said, the reason is, when you talked about times being difficult today, you had $1 billion in your pocket. He said, when everybody else in this room, when they're going through tough times, they're trying to figure out how to make payroll and feed their families in the same week. And he said, so I respect you and I love you, but I'm nothing like you. Have a good night. And he just went and he sat down. It was unbelievable. And in that moment, I became Howard Schultz's biggest supporter and biggest fan. Because what he did is he stood up. He'd been sitting, he stood up from the couch, and he walked across the stage. He said, what's your name? Marty. Marty, I'm exactly like you. And I'll tell you why. He said, when I was a young guy, I was a salesman. I used to sell coffee machines, coffee parts, to coffee stores. And on one of my sales calls, I met these guys who had a store called Starbucks. And I just love the idea of being a part of that store. I love these guys. And so I asked them for a job. And they hired me. They hired Howard to be like their director of marketing. So Howard, he's all excited about this position. And he goes home and he comes up with this great idea. And he goes in and he presents it. And he's totally fired up. And his big idea was he wanted to take the espresso machine and move it from the back counter to the front so that people could customize their orders and watch their drinks get made. And you know what they thought? They fired him. They fired Howard Schultz. And he was so upset, he was so frustrated, so angry, he decided that he was going to compete. So he went around and he looked for another coffee brand that he could license and then take to market. And he found one. And he got to work in that business. And then one day, he got the phone call. He got a phone call from his father-in-law. And his father-in-law said this. He said, Howard, I love you, I respect you. He said, well, we got to talk. He said, we got a problem. He said, the problem is that your wife, my daughter, is like 7, 8 months pregnant. And she's the only person in this family that's brought home a paycheck in the last 18 months. Maybe, respectfully, maybe it's time that you put this dream on hold. Maybe it's time that you kind of go out and shut it down and go get a job. And so Howard, he wanted to do the right thing. He got his keys, he went home, and that night he talked to his wife. And he said, here's what happened. She said, no. And she gave what I call like the Rocky, the Adrian speech. Like that speech that, Adrian gives to Rocky before the big fight. And she said, no, Howard. She said, look, here's the thing. She said, this thing, it's not just your vision, it's our vision. And it's not just your dream, it's our dream. And if it takes all night to do it, we're going to stay up and we're going to figure it out. And guess what? They did. And what I learned in that moment was this. What I learned is I always thought that I was like the most important person in the companies that I started because I had like the fancy title or maybe it was my idea. But what I learned is this, is that the most important person in every business is not me or you are the founder. The most important person is the one that you come home to. It's your spouse. It's your significant other. It's your family. It's your close friends. All the other people that are impacted by you going out and chasing your dream. Does that make sense? And what I learned is there's really 3 things that we need to do with these people. By the way, those people have got the worst job on the planet, right? They've got the worst job. Usually, they're just as invested in the business as we are, like financially or with time or whatever. And we go home, and what we do is vent at them. So I don't call them CEOs for chief executive officers. I call them CVOs. They're our chief venting officers. And so that's what we do. It's a hard day. We go home and we just let it all out, right? And we do it at 11 o'clock at night. And we feel great. And we sleep like a baby. And they're up all night with one eye open worried. So there's 3 things you got to do with your CVO. The first is this. You've got to be on the same page with regard to how much time and how much money you're willing to give to this thing, to this venture. And what I've learned is I'd rather be on the same page with my CVO in terms of risk than on a different page risking too much and knowing that person is always nervous or resentful or has knots in their stomach. The second thing I've learned is this. We have to understand how much our CVO wants to be a part of this whole thing, a part of this process. And here's what I mean. What I mean is some people like to know everything about what's going on. They want to know like every single blow by blow. For others, that is way too much information. They can't take the ups and downs. So what we have to do is understand how much information those people at home, those people around us want to be a part of. And the third thing is this real quick. My wife, Rachel, taught me that the way you spell love with an entrepreneur is this, T-I-M-E. You may not be able to give a lot of time during your launch to the people you love around you, but when you do, you have to truly be present and you got to be locked in. Does that make sense? All right, which leads to the 5th and the final thing. The 5th and final thing I want you to remember about your launch. It's keep your eyes up and keep them on the horizon. Keep your eyes up and on the horizon. And here's what I mean. What I mean is, you guys all heard Greg read last night. Wasn't Greg awesome? Yeah, Greg's awesome. So Greg is one of my closest friends, and we had an opportunity a couple years ago to go and learn how to drive race cars. And I was like so excited because I've always wanted to learn how to drive a race car. How cool. So when I got in the car, I remember that driving a race car and like learning how to do it probably taught me more about business than it did about sports or driving or anything like that. You see, the way it works is you sit in the car and you're holding the wheel and you have an instructor right next to you. And that instructor is sitting at sort of an angle. And they have their hand and they keep their hand on the steering wheel. It's just really light. So as you're driving down the course, if you get off, what they can do is make a really like slight minor adjustment. You don't even notice it's happening. So the first thing that this instructor teaches you is to keep your eyes up and on the horizon, where you want to go, on your goal. Now, at 5 miles an hour, that's incredibly simple. At 150 miles an hour, that's really tough. Because here's what happens. The faster you go, the faster you move in life, the faster things come at you. What happens is you stop looking ahead and you start to focus on what's right in front of you. And as a race car driver, what that means is you start to notice, like you start looking like right over the edge of your hood. If you're a skier, it's called looking over the tips of your skis. if you know that expression. And you notice every single like rock and pebble in the road. And so you make all these really sharp, fast, quirky adjustments. Now, if you're going 5 miles an hour, doesn't matter. If you're jamming in your business, like if you're crushing it on the track, that's going to take you right into the wall. So the second thing that you learn is how to crash, which is like super cool, right? You got to learn how to crash. And the way you do it is simple, is you're driving down the road and the instructor sees that you're starting to get comfortable, maybe a little bit of cocky, right, with your driving. And you're cruising along, and when you least expect it, they take their hand, they hold the wheel, and they tug on it. Now, the question I have is this. When you're cruising along and something feels like it's getting out of control, maybe your business, something's out of control, what's the first thing that you do? Most people look at the thing that they fear most. And when you're driving a race car, that's the wall. So here's what happens. You feel out of control, and your eyes immediately go to the wall. And that, your eyes going this way, it pulls your head, which pulls your shoulder and moves your hands, and that's why you head to the wall. So the instructor has one really simple job. And it's this. All the instructor does is take their hand and put their hand on your helmet and just glide it back. And as soon as you feel that force, what happens is your eyes go back this way. Your head goes back this way. Your shoulders, and that's how you crash or get out of a crash. Does that make sense? You see, when you keep your eyes up and you're looking at the horizon, what you're able to do is anticipate. And as opposed to these quick, sharp adjustments, you make slow and real graceful movement that takes you on the path to your goal. Does that make sense? Awesome. So I'm confident if you just follow in our short period of time, those simple steps, if that's all you do, you guys will put yourself in a position that's like light years ahead of everybody else and on your way to an amazing launch. Thank you.